If you are excited for Starfield, then look no further than X4 Foundations to satisfy your space exploration cravings. An epic adventure awaits you in this vast universe full of deadly Xenon machines, marauding Kha'ak aliens, and many struggling factions vying for control over rich markets ripe for player exploitation. Space battles are a blast if you're flying the tiniest of ships or the biggest of lumbering behemoths. There is always a ship for any occasion and any dangerous situation. I played 100 hours of X4's newest DLC, Kingdom's End, that introduced the floaty, fishy Boron into the game. Unique with their architecture, beautiful ship design, and an amazing soundtrack, it was an amazing journey to go from a little nobody with a single ship to a baron of industry and commerce with a fleet of ships numbering in hundreds and dozens of stations producing everything a man or an alien could desire. But it was not without struggles, and here are the many trials and tribulations that happened during my 100 hours in X4 Foundations. I began as one of the Boron diplomats and was promptly invited to meet the Queen. She encouraged us to be peaceful and kind and help the known systems. Well, I had my own idea of how that's going to go, but more on that later. After the meeting, Numankared gave us all a mission and sent us off into the vast universe. My first mission? Deliver snacks to a distant scientist. Truly a mission worthy of my skills as a pilot. They gave me a Thrasher gunboat, which certainly wasn't the best as it mostly relied on its turrets, but it was far from the worst. I flew to a nearby factory to acquire the snacks and hired an extra pilot. After that, I went to explore the Boron space, dropping satellites near important stations to keep up to date with what's happening in the Queendom while I'm out there exploring. Of course, my new pilot crashed my ship into a friendly carrier, so I had to take over to untangle the mess. But eventually, I made it to Heretic's End, which was my snack delivery destination. I docked at the large station and met Bosota, a renowned Boron scientist who admitted to hijacking my comms to make me deliver the snacks. What a nice guy! But as a reward, he bestowed upon me the station, making it my new headquarters, allowing me to eventually begin research here. So now that I had my own HQ, I decided to explore the sector where it was stationed. There was a Maja Das factory belonging to the Scale Plate Pack right next door, basically a drug lab ran by a gang, so that boded well for the future. Remember how I had my own idea of peace in the known systems? You see, my plan was to befriend everyone and shepherd the races into the bright, peaceful future. But to do that, I needed to become strong and powerful, so a little bit of violence to get to that peace was all that was needed, and thusly, I turned to pirating. My first target was a small delivery ship on its way to a nearby free port. We danced around for a while and my turrets almost destroyed it before I managed to persuade the captain to abandon ship, and just like that, it was mine. It was badly damaged after the long pursuit, but it was the first cog in our future grand fleet. I gave it a new captain and continued my exploration of Heretic's End. And by exploration, I mean I attacked a Taladi gas miner, but he had backup so I had to flee. But the Xyarth miner was not so lucky as to have support, so we danced around until it was mine. I then sent it back deeper into Boron space where it could begin mining and bringing in passive income for me. And I went for a quick exploratory run of the Commonwealth Highway to uncover more of the map. But my trip was cut short as Bozota sent me a message that he spotted a strange ship. As I flew back, I sent my small cargo ship to purchase 86k worth of Maja Das from the Scale Plate factory. I was already engaged into piracy, might as well do some drug dealing as well and turn a profit. I met the offending ship, and Dr. Rig there told me they needed some antimatter cells to speed up their research, so I had to fly deeper into Boron space to purchase them. While flying there, I sent the cargo ship to Hatikwa trade station to sell the dust, netting me a nice little profit. I then set up a small extra module for extra cargo space at the HQ, giving them 100k credits for expenses, and hired a builder. It was a tiny addition to the base, but also my first step towards building a grand station. I also noticed a Boron fighter dancing around with a Xyarth Mamba. I went to investigate and convinced the aggressor to eject, gaining a sweet new ship. I sent it to Argon space to upgrade and then jumped into my transport to deliver those antimatter cells. Dr. Rick was happy, but naturally required more help. Specifically, he wanted me to position 3 ships to perform a synchronized long-range scan. So I did that, which made him even happier and netted me 5 reputation with Sagaris pioneers, proving that I was more than just a pirate. Dr. Rig then invited me to his ship for another chat and asked me to, well, hack my own HQ. I almost told him to go hack himself, but Bozota actually wanted me to do it, so I went along with the plan. I scanned the leak and Bozo did something to Dr. Rig's malware and sent me back to the man. I was starting to feel a bit like Morty here, but Rick was satisfied with the results and finally agreed to leave the system. That gave me leave to go back to my old ways, and I poked a scale plate scout until he bailed and then borrowed his ship. I was using Mamba for this as it was much more suitable for such work than the big flying fish. I then decided to do some more work for my Boron friends and flew to the Sanctuary of Darkness, where I discovered a fierce dogfight going on with the Kha'ak. I blew up a couple of them, then docked at the large carrier where I got my mission briefing from Leda Wee. It seemed like we needed to blow up a lot of Kha'ak so the Boron could build a space highway, which sounds like something straight out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But I was allowed to borrow a sweet Corvette, so I didn't complain. What followed was an epic hour of constant battle with the Kha'ak. I followed the big carrier to the rendezvous point, dispatching multiple Kha'ak attacks along the way. But the real mess began once we arrived. There was a swarm of enemy raiders doing whatever those weird bugs do. Alas, they were in the way of the Boron highway construction, so once again we sallied forth. A grand battle followed across half of the sector until the Boron prevailed with my help, of course. Naturally, Leda Wee was impressed by my skill and paid me 750,000 credits, which basically doubled my money. Alas, he did take away the Hydra I was flying for the duration of the battle. Mission completed and Boron got their new highway. With the money I now had, I decided to buy an M-class gas miner to add to the one already mining hydrogen. It cost me $500,000, but I knew I'll get my credits back soon, and then some. I also bought 2 M-class mineral miners, which cost me an additional $1 million, and sent them to mine ore in Barren Shores sector. With passive income settled for a while, I then decided to join the Hatikwas Trade Revolution, and completed a couple of missions for them. One had me deliver some medical supplies, which netted me a free small cargo ship. The second mission was a bit more dangerous as they had me hack a scale plate station, which eventually led to me shooting down one of the pack ships. I also bought a new scout to explore more of the Boron systems, then sent my cargo ships to buy energy cells needed for first research, as my HQ finally completed the storage module. I then switched back to my Thrasher gunboat and flew to the Paranid territories. There was a reason for that, and it was a very dangerous reason. You see, I knew there was an abandoned Paranid destroyer stranded deep in the Xenon space, and if I could recover it, well, I would have a free destroyer. So I flew into the Xenon-occupied faulty logic system, dodging giant murder machines awaiting there and zigzagging through minefields. But it was all worth it. The huge destroyer was in mint condition. I transferred my best pilot to that ship and once again flew past many Xenon patrols back to the safe space. I then told the pilot to go acquire some marines for future pirate endeavors, and I went back home. On the way, I bought 2 more M-class gas miners for another 1 million credits, this time around to mine some methane, and initiated the first teleportation research, which Bozota happily completed. My next research goal was to unlock the ability to hack production modules, to acquire blueprints for them. But to be able to hack, I needed to craft some EMP bombs. So my first stop was at the Majadas factory, where I spent a couple of minutes shooting down local traffic until I acquired a bunch of security containers. Then I spent even more time shooting the asteroids nearby to get some lodestones. Last piece of the puzzle were remote detonators, which I bought at the local Freeport and didn't need to shoot anybody for it. I also acquired the bomb launcher spacesuit upgrade as well. That was everything I needed, and I crafted a bunch of EMP bombs. Then I went to explore desired sectors while waiting for the resources needed for the next research project, and completed a couple of errands for them for some extra reputation gains. They were my direct neighbors, and I needed to extend my friendship to them so I could make more money. Then, with research completed, I flew deep into Boron space, where I knew I could hack a couple of production modules I wanted. My first target was a solar power plant, and a well-placed EMP bomb exposed the weak links I needed to scan. Unfortunately, they were stuck inside the panel, so it took quite a lot of maneuvering to get to them. But eventually, I did it, and that allowed me to add my first energy cell production module to my station's build queue. But I wasn't done. My next target was an ore refinery, which was thankfully much easier to scan than the previous module. I hacked 2 more stations after that, acquiring blueprints for silicon wafers and water refinery. I also bought 2 more M-class mineral miners to mine the rich deposits of silicon in Rogue's demise and add to my passive income. Throughout this whole hacking mission, I was also trying to amass all the needed materials for the next research at my HQ, but I could not find any places that would sell Teladianium, so I sent my scout ships to Teladi-controlled space to explore and hopefully arrange a profitable trade. While waiting for them, I completed 1 more mission for the Zyrth, finally bringing my reputation with them to neutral and allowing us to trade at last. Next came the Hour of the Queen. I decided to try and finish a couple of main story missions for Boron, and I began by locating the missing Paranid diplomat. Of course, he was stuck in a minefield with 2 Holy Order ships waiting to ambush me. Naturally, that did not end well for them, and I even captured 1 to add to my growing armada of scout ships. I then destroyed the mines so the diplomat could go back to his diplomatic things, which prompted the Queen to speak to all the Boron, announcing positive diplomatic relations with both major Paranid factions. Next on my list was the mission to deliver 3 Boron Makos to Hatikwa, which cost me a bit over 1,000,000 credits. The Queen spoke 2 more times, announcing the creation of joint defense force with Argon and failed diplomatic contact with the Split. Next, I bought a Barracuda heavy fighter for myself, so I could fly a proper Boron ship instead of a stolen Zyrth Mamba. At this point, I started trading satellites. I realized advanced satellites could be bought for really cheap at some stations and then sold at another for much more. Of course, that was not something I could automate, but it quickly added up to my credit reserves as I could earn 1,000,000 credits in profit per each run. You see, I realized I'll need a lot of credits really soon, faster than I imagined, as there was already a Xenon attack force wrecking Zyrth stations in the neighboring system. While the Split managed to destroy one of the Xenon Ks, they had nothing to fight the giant Eye, so I knew I needed to prepare. I also finally got Teladianium to finish storage module hacking research, and I flew my new Barracuda to a couple of Boron stations to steal their blueprints. Alas, my run was cut short when I realized the Xenon Eye had actually entered my home sector. There was nothing I could do to even scratch it. It had the power to destroy my HQ and every ship in that sector without breaking a sweat. So I did the only thing I could think of: bait it. You see, I was master at baiting, and I jumped into my destroyer, which was nearby, and very slowly flew toward the Morningstar jump gate. The Eye, of course, couldn't ignore such a masterful bait, and he followed. It took almost an hour for him to fly all the way across, destroying multiple fighters who for some reason thought they can do something against the metal monstrosity. We jumped through the gate together, and I quickly burned to a safe distance while Argon fighters swarmed the machine. I helped with my barrage, but the most damage was provided by the conveniently placed Argon defense station, to which the Eye was masterfully baited to. It took a while, but in the end, we won the battle and watched it go up in a giant ball of flame. With peace returning to my home, I went back to work. And by work, I mean hacking my Boron friends, continuing the research, and slowly adding new modules to my HQ. I noticed that the Xenon raiding parties were already back to partying in the Zyrth space, but there was nothing I could do about that right now. Well, there was one thing, but for that, I needed to fly all the way to Argon space. You see, I wanted to build a defense station at the jump gate to Zyrth space to protect my home against giant Xenon death machines. But for that, I needed large plasma turret blueprints, which my Boron friends didn't have. So, I needed Argon, but there was a slight issue. I needed 20 reputation before they would be willing to sell them to me, and I was far away from that goal. So, I went to work, shooting down criminals near Argon stations, placing mines, and ferrying passengers. That got me to 10 rep and a meeting with their official just to tell me they now consider me a friend. Yay, but clearly not friend enough, so I had to continue the grind. The next hour was much the same, shooting down criminals around Argon stations and doing odd jobs for them. To spice things up, I began building a nice little water factory in Boron space, as they constantly had water shortage issues. I also noticed the satellite trade was becoming impossible, as pretty much every wharf I used to trade at started running out of scanning arrays and hull parts. I made it to 15 reputation before having to leave the Argon space due to a Xenon raiding party causing havoc at my home. I gave them a fiery welcome that showed them exactly what I thought about our new robot overlords. And since I was in Heretic's End, I decided to shoot down a few asteroids and craft a couple of EMP bombs. I then flew to a Boron hull part factory to yoink their blueprints. I then added 4 new production modules to my HQ, which cost me over 8 million, but I knew it will make me money when operational. I also kept on adding new mining and trade ships to my stations, but I had to start buying them from Commonwealth, as Boron seemed to be too lazy to actually produce any resources needed for ship production. Then I went back to Argon and continued working on my reputation. I shot logboxes and Xenon, delivered questionable narcotics to people's homes, and met the Xenon War Coordinator, which was good because those Inferno machines have been sending their raiding parties into my home sector, disrupting trade and generally being a pain in my ass. But the good news was that my water supply factory also became operational and began producing water, in hopes to help my Boron friends with their constant shortages. At this point, my Argon rep was pretty high, up to 18 already, so I accepted the mission to actually build a whole station for them. It seemed pretty simplistic and the required modules were less than 1 million, so I set out to build it. And because I've not spent enough money yet, I doubled the whole part production module at my HQ, costing another 8 million. But I was confident that once it was up and running, I would be able to supply many neighboring sectors, and with just 2 out of 9 planned modules, the station already started making me money. I then flew to one of the Argon defense platforms to steal the blueprints for it, which didn't make the police there very happy. So I went to their representative and bought the police license and made myself the law. The factory I was building for the Argon also completed, and I received over 2 million credits for it, but unfortunately, no extra rep. So I went back to doing missions and shooting criminals. My 2 stations have been producing in the meantime. The water supply was doing great, making money selling to nearby Boron stations, so I kept buying new miners and traders to add to its fleet. My HQ, on the other hand, was not being so profitable. While the whole part production was in full swing, my manager refused to use the trade ships to sell them, instead constantly trying to feed his workforce. I mean, who cares if the workers have nothing to eat? It's not my fault they only want to eat fish feed, which no one around was producing. So I ignored that problem for now and manually sent traders to deliver hull parts to nearby Boron factories. You see, there was only one Boful factory nearby which was feeding 3 full sectors of Boron, and failing at that spectacularly. They just couldn't keep up with the demand. So I flew there to hack and acquire blueprints for Bogas, Plankton, and Boful production. I also decided to stop at Queen's representative, who bestowed upon me the rank of Queen's Knight for reaching 20 reputation with them. I also agreed to build a small station for Boron before flying back home, where I finally caved in and started planning my own Boful factory. When I returned from Boron space, I went back to shooting Argon criminals. But it only took 1 mission to finally get to 20 rep with them. So I flew to Argon shipyard to once again meet their representative, who bestowed upon me the rank of Hero of the Federation, and that allowed me to purchase the large plasma turrets, the last piece I needed to build my defense station. I placed it right above the jump gate and outfitted it with 4 defense platforms bristling with guns. I set my destroyer and the flying fish to protect the build site, and not a moment too late, as Xenon began sending more and more raiding parties into Heretic's End. With that finally set up, I was free to pursue more Boron missions, so I decided to fly into Terran space and explore there with the goal to befriend the sussy Earthlings. They were not very fond of me, so I had to shoot down a bunch of criminals for them and defuse a couple of minefields before they begrudgingly allowed me to dock at their stations. That allowed me to search a bar where apparently a Boron diplomat lost some water. I get it, it happens to the best of us. What was weird about it was that the Terrans wanted that water, so I had to deliver the yucky thing to one of their ships. I mean, humans. What a strange bunch, am I right? With Terran matters now concluded, I flew back to Heretic's End, where Xenon managed to actually kill my flying fish with their constant assaults upon my in-construction defense platform. And it would have remained in construction forever because there was almost no places that produced turret components it needed. So I had to manually send my cargo ships to far off corners of the universe to bring them in, and I personally joined the defense at the construction site. After we repelled the Xenon, I decided to visit the Xyarth again. I wanted to become friends with them because my long-term goal was to build a shipyard in Heretic's End and supply the nearby factions with ships. The fact that those nearby factions didn't like each other didn't escape me, but war profiteering is the best. So I flew around their stations, once again shut down some criminals, delivered burgers to people's homes, and blew up asteroids rigged with explosives. It wasn't too long before they called me to see the representative, who granted me the rank of Spear of the Patriarch, which gave me the ability to buy a bunch of ship blueprints that I knew I'll eventually need for my future wharf. I then had to hightail it back to my HQ as the Kha'ak launched an attack party, and I helped my destroyer shoot down a couple of them. The trouble didn't end there though, as a skill-plate pirate attacked one of my traders, and even though I was right up on him, he proceeded to blow up my transport. That made me slightly upset, and I hunted down that bastard's escape pod and told him exactly what I thought of his actions. Now that I was friends with the Split, I wanted to improve my relations with the rest of the factions. But I had enough of shooting down criminals, so I bought multiple mining ships in each region and unleashed them to slowly bring my reputation up. I also decided to finish the final 2 Boron missions. I loaded up a transport with water and sent it on a long path towards Tidebreak. And I also began building a Boron diplomatic outpost in Taladi space. But the high point of the hour was when my Hydra was finally built, a glorious new corvette that I requested hours ago and had to personally deliver a batch of turret components to a Boron wharf, dodging pirates along the way. But at long last, I had a proper ship to fly. I decided to take it for a spin into an unknown space next to my Xyarth neighbors, space where all the Xenon have been coming from. On the other side awaited me a struggling Paranid colony, besieged by many murderous machines. It was a good test for my new ride, as I had to dispatch many Xenon M's and P's, and with little help from scarce Paranid patrols. But then I saw it. They were sending in a K, a large destroyer intent on, well, destroying. But I knew how to disable one, and I flew straight in to disable his twin engines. It was a sitting duck now, but no matter how much I pounded the giant piece of metal, I could not dent its shields. I had to fight off constant Xenon assaults as well, but without the proper fire support, I had to eventually give up. I returned back to Heretic's End, just in time to see my administrative center go up, which claimed a sector in my name. Let's just say it didn't make many people happy, but I didn't care. I was the one defending it after all. Next, I went to personally deliver that shipment of water to Tidebreak, which made Riptide Rakers very happy. Only that diplomatic outpost remained to be built, and I realized I was being a silly Billy and built a wrong module on it, so that one still had a while to go. At this point, that big Xenon K made it into Xyar's sector, and with a swarm of support ships started blasting split patrols. But luckily, Paranid were sending in their own Zeus destroyer, and I decided to help. The Zeus was absolutely swarmed when I arrived, and I had to fight through hordes of Xenon to free it. But hey, at least the Split were paying me well for obliterating their enemies. Luckily, the K's engines were still in bad shape, so it was easy for me to disable it once again and wait for the Zeus to show up. But the stupid Paranid parked it way below the big destroyer, only using one turret to blast its shields. Besides, there were constant swarms of Xenon raiders coming at us, and I probably killed like 50 just to keep the Zeus from losing its focus on the K. But it wasn't enough, so I grabbed my own destroyer and flew it into the battle. I unleashed from my front batteries and all my turrets, and finally the K melted. At some point during this hour-long fight, the diplomatic outpost finally finished as well, and the Queen rewarded me handsomely. A new regal Hydra awaited me at my HQ, and with it an invitation to meet the Queen again. So I flew in to meet her with my sweet new ride, and noticed there was a hefty credit reward awaiting me. She thanked me and the other heralds for our work, and then told us to do whatever we want, which to be honest was a bit of a letdown, as I was hoping for something more from the story besides being an errand boy. Oh well. Now that I had over 100 million credits in my bank account, I decided to build a factory I've been planning for a long while, the forever missing turret components factory. But for that, I needed to do a lot of hacking first. I bought the plot next to the Boron snack factory and slowly added modules as I flew from station to station, hacking them one at a time. I needed graphene and superfluid coolants to produce quantum tubes. Then I needed silicon wafers and refined metals to make scanning arrays and also microchips. All those intermediate intermediate products combined would eventually give me the desired turret components, and I added a giant stack of 10 production units for those, which hit me with the bill for over 20 million credits. I was planning to go check out the construction site, but then I noticed a lone pirate behemoth, a perfect target. I quickly flew in and disabled its engines, then called my destroyer. Remember how I filled it to the brim with marines ages ago? Yeah, it was exactly for this kind of situation. I slowly worked on the pirates' turrets, disabling them one by one, being very careful not to get blasted to pieces. That gave the marines an opening, and in they went. It took a long time and it was a tough fight, but eventually they cleared out the crew and I got a new destroyer. It was all kinds of broken, but after a quick fix, it was ready to join my fleet. While all that was happening, my passive rep gain reached 10 reputation with Taladi, Paranid, and the Terrans, so I flew to their stations to receive the corresponding ranks. Becoming a friend of the Terrans was the big one here, as that allowed me to explore further into their outer core systems, places I was very excited to visit as it's been 3 years since last I played X4, and back then none of those sectors existed. Alas, it seemed the outer core was pretty empty, besides duty called, as Sagaris pioneers joined the ranks of factions that wanted to make me their official friend. I also decided to help one of their researchers, but while he gave me a new scout ship, he did send me on a mission of questionable nature, so for the time being I decided to ignore it. My turret components factory was progressing nicely at this point as well, with all the intermediate parts up and running, and many mining ships scouring the nearby sectors. Construction of the first component production module also began, and it seemed like the whole thing would be operational in no time. But of course, piracy in the sector was still a big problem, with Scaleplate Pack constantly harassing my traders. One of their destroyers made that mistake, and I decided to pay him a visit. The stupid pirates stood no chance against my nimble Regal Hydra, as I blew up their engines and took out all of their turrets. Then, all I had to do was to wait for my 2 destroyers to lumber in, and the show could begin. But the show did not begin because of my beautiful Boron friends. While I launched the Marines, they decided to send in their own ships and blow up the Scaleplate destroyer with my Marines on board. Thank you, Boron, you're the best! So I went back to my plans, and oh boy were they grand. I began by constructing a couple of smart chip production modules on my HQ, and then it was time for hacking. I had a plan to build 5 new factories, which would cover all the building blocks necessary to construct the ship. But first, I needed to steal the blueprints. I started by buying a plot next to my HQ, where I slowly added multiple modules as I hacked them. This station was a weapon components factory, and it required many moving parts to make it work. I already knew energy cells, graphene, and superfluid coolant production modules, but I also needed plasma conductors and of course weapon components. While on my way to hack a Boron pier, I spotted another pirate destroyer and quickly moved in to disable it. This time around, my watery friends only proved a distraction and my marines were successful. The next hour, I spent flying around to hack the last modules I needed for the future. I grabbed advanced composites, missile components, and antimatter converters. Then it was advanced electronics, antimatter cells, and engine parts. And last, it was field coils and shield components. That gave me all the parts I needed to eventually build my own ships, but of course I was still many millions of credits away from that goal. I also noticed my defense platform was working well, as it has managed to destroy a Xenon K at some point while I flew around. Now at this point I had a fleet of more than 100 ships and 5 operational stations, all making me money. I had over 160 million credits in the bank, but I knew I'll need a lot more before all my plans came to fruition. My scouts have also explored the whole map for me, besides some Xenon sectors, and my Xenon neighbors were the ones on my mind for my next mission. I flew into split space to destroy a swarm of the nasty machines who were harassing my traders. Then I went to deploy multiple advanced satellites to improve my vision coverage so I could always be prepared for their next attack. While placing them, I also set up my next factory in Heretic's End, this one with the goal to produce ship engines. Now that I had a moment of peace from Xenon attacks, I flew down to Holy Order space to become initiated as their friend. But while I was on a diplomatic mission, pirates struck again and shot down 2 of my traders. One was even followed by the Boron police, but they ignored him until he fully destroyed my vessel. Once again, Thank you, my Boron friends. I had to order another Hydra and set up a small patrol around my snacks and turrets factories to hopefully protect my trade. At this point, my engine factory was progressing nicely, so I started building another station nearby, this one with the goal to produce missile components and eventually antimatter converters. Then it was time to face the Xenon again. I blew up many M's and P's at the gate into Zyre's space, preying on them as they flew in small groups. In the meantime, my last remaining scout pushed deep into the enemy space and managed to deploy satellites next to their shipyard and wharf, giving me valuable information for the future. I also spotted a brave Terran Asgard fighting alone in Xenon territory. It was clearly a suicide attempt, but he managed to take down 2 Ks before succumbing to the machine swarms. With the gate where I stood guard now full of debris and Xenon remains, I decided to check the other nearby patriarchy sectors and quickly noticed a K wreaking havoc on Zyre's factory. I knew what my next target was and I called in 2 of my destroyers for support. Lucky for me, the K was busy destroying the station, so it was very easy to fly under its radar and blow up the engines. Then I worked my way around the giant machine and took out its turrets. A helpless sitting duck is my preferred version of Xenon destroyers, and I used my 2 behemoths to hunt it down. Xenon actually tried to build a defense station right next to the factory, so I destroyed that as well, then sent my behemoths home. I then had the ungrateful job of hunting down the remains of machine raiding parties, and when I was done with them, I flew back to Wretched Skies and spent another half of an hour chasing down Xenon parties there. By the time I was done at my neighbor's family Jin system, where I blew up the K earlier, got swarmed again. That poor ore refinery was on the brink of being destroyed by the massive amounts of Xenon assaulting it, but still, I flew in to help. Alas, I was too late. I barely shot down 2 ships before the station blew up and they all turned on me, which was a bad decision on their part, as I burned to the nearby split wharf and they all followed like obedient puppies. I actually barely made it and had to dock to repair, but the station had defense drones and the whole swarm got obliterated. Watching those drones at work actually gave me an idea and I decided to test it. I bought as many laser towers as I could carry, which was 66. Then I flew to Wretched Skies and deployed all 66 of them right next to the gate where the Xenon were coming from. Sure, I knew those towers won't stop a destroyer, but in theory, they should melt the smaller ships. Since there were no Xenon there to test my theory, I went to buy another batch of 66 and deploy them near the blown up ore refinery in Family Jin system. Lucky for me, there were Xenon happy to test my defense system and it was beautiful watching them melt in seconds. Now that I had a moment of peace, I flew back to my HQ and began the construction of another factory, this one with the goal of producing advanced electronics. Speaking of a moment of peace, I noticed there was a new Xenon K in Family Jin system, and of course the Split were not sending anyone to fight it. So it was up to me again to fly there, cripple it completely with my Regal Hydra, then finish it off with the Behemoth. Blowing up that giant death machine actually got me to 20 reputation with the Zyrth, so I flew to meet the representative and receive his praise. My passive rep gain also brought me to 10 with the other Split faction, the Free Families, so I went to meet them as well. On my way back, I deployed a new stack of 66 laser towers next to another gate in Jin system, then went home to focus on economy. My missile factory was almost complete, so I added antimatter converter production to it, which set me back another 12 million credits. But because that wasn't enough for me, I also finished adding modules to the advanced electronics factory, and that cost me another 10 million. Xenon were quiet during this time, but the pirates were more active than ever. I actually bought a Thrasher and 4 Makos just to have them police my trade routes, but it was hardly enough. Now, while I did have peace from pirates for the next hour, one of my miners got blown up by marauding Kha'ak, so I helped the Boron deal with those pests. I also went to hack a couple of habitation modules as I wanted to introduce workforce to more of my stations in the future, as I had enough Bofu stored to feed them. But I figured I'll need a lot of water as well, so I set up a quick little water supply factory in Heretic's End, which brought the number of stations under my control to 10 now. By the time I was finished, there was already a sneaky K in Wretched Skies that managed to evade my laser tag show, so I flew there to meet it. The reason why I always went in with my Hydra first to cripple it was the fact that one-on-one, my destroyer would get obliterated in seconds, so I had to be careful about it. I then helped Argon set up another of my laser tower fields as they seemed to have some issues with Xenon raiding parties. Then I got the call from Bozo Utah and went to meet him and another lady at my HQ. She proposed I build a casino for my workers, but naturally I had to work my ass off to get the blueprints for it. I helped my competitor expose a race fixing ring and had to even fly one of the courses, which let's just say was a waste of my talents and time. I then helped him close a space-time anomaly and rescued him from a minefield. Yes, he was useless, but in the end he finally gave me the blueprints and I started building the casino at my HQ. I then spotted a scale plate destroyer doing pirate shenanigans, so naturally I went to shoot down its engines. I brought 2 squads of marines with me and deployed all 50 of them versus 15 of the enemy. But those were some tough pirates and only 16 of my marines survived the battle. But I got myself a new destroyer, so those sacrifices were worth it as far as I'm concerned. I had my manager send emails to the families of the deceased. It's fine. At this point, I had 250 million credits on my account, and that was my target goal to begin the ship production. I flew to Boran Representative and spent 200 million on production blueprints, various S&M ship models, and many different engines, shields, weapons, and all the little parts that make a ship. Then it was time to build the whole thing, and the build was pretty simple and not too expensive. While waiting for resources, I flew to Wretched Skies where another Xenon K was sneaking around and dealt with it. Then I flew to Argon, Zyrth, and Paranid representatives to acquire some more faction-specific ship blueprints, which put another dent into my bank reserves. But what is another 30 million when you already spent 200? I had to wait some more, so I flew around hunting down rogue pirates, Kha'ak marauders, and Xenon raiders to pass the time. When the pier was built, I assigned a manager to take care of the place, then ordered 10 trade ships that would be the beginning of the trade fleet needed to keep the wharf operational 24/7. Then it was finally built, and the traders went bananas. Manager demanded 50 million for expenses, which brought my bank account all the way down to 20 mil, the lowest I've been in like 40 hours. Resources started piling up in huge numbers, but there were some notable shortages. Specifically, my turret factory was sending 0 components to the wharf, bunch of slackers. But we got our first order in, and it was actually Argon who bought a single fighter. Great success. It turned out there was a big demand for ships to be built, a demand I couldn't quite keep up with as my wharf was lacking resources. Mainly weapon components and advanced electronics seemed to be the biggest issue. I bought even more trade ships and hoped the manager will fix the situation, while I had to go deal with another Xenon K that blew up one of the Zyrth factories and my trader with it. I actually wanted to test the new destroyer, but unfortunately it turned out to be pretty lackluster. My wharf still had supply issues, so I transferred my turret factory manager over. He was a 5-star manager already, and that instantly gave his ships access to many more stations. And off they went, deep into split territories that were unfortunately besieged by the Xenon. I needed that trade though, so I flew in to protect them. I destroyed a bunch of Xenon M's and P's and even 2 of their satellites. Those sneaky machines were spying on us. I also blew up their defense platform they were constructing and then deployed a line of laser towers in front of the gate they were coming from. I also bought a couple more M-ship blueprints from the Patriarchy, spending even more of my meager millions. I then went to deploy even more laser towers at one of the Zyrth gates bordering on Xenon territory. My wharf was still lacking advanced electronics at this point, so I made sure my electronics factory only sold them to my faction, instead of sending them to the split. I also flew to Argon and Paranid and bought some more M-ship and weapon blueprints. I then noticed there were 2 Xenon Ks in Wretched Skies closing in on the gates to my home. I couldn't allow that, so I flew in to disable them. That proved quite tricky as they were able to cover each other, but luckily they were also busy destroying my trade ships flying by. Once they were sitting ducks, I flew in with my behemoth and blew them both to pieces. At this point, my wharf was very busy as long as we had the resources, so I decided to increase the ship prices. I went with 111% first and they kept on buying them. So I increased the price to 120% and they didn't stop. I went up to 130% and the orders kept coming in. In fact, in the last 2 hours, my wharf made over 40 million credits of profit, so things were looking up. More Xenon pest control followed, and I went to place laser tower traps in the 2 Paranid sectors near my home. Making it safer meant that my ships were able to trade there again, as I've previously forbidden those areas. I also blew up an in-construction Xenon defense platform, then baited a K next to some Paranid stations that blew it up with ease. Wharf was still making me money, but it could have made much more if I had the resources I needed. Weapon components seemed to be a new issue, so I made sure my factory was only selling to my wharf from now on. I also set up habitation modules to be built on electronics and engine factories to get a boost in production. Then I remembered I built that casino at my HQ some time ago and I went to visit it. I used the crafting station there to craft a SIDA, which is a device that speeds up time by a lot and can be used to make the game fly past when you need something done ASAP, but I personally prefer not to use it as it can have some negative impact on how the AI operates, so I didn't use it in this playthrough. At this point my wharf was a battlefield and it looked like the split were gaining the upper hand, so I flew to Argon and bought 2 more M-ship blueprints to give them a fighting chance. Then I was off to play with the Xenon again, this time around in the Free Families territory. I wanted to deploy another laser trap, but there were a constant surge of Xenon fighters coming in, so I never got the chance. I fought them for a whole hour, killing dozens of them, but still couldn't make it to the gate to deploy the towers. But while the system was called Fires of Defeat, I was not ready to be defeated by the foul machines and I pushed on. It took a while longer, but I finally managed to secure the gate. Then I went to help the Teladi, who had a K-sized problem on their hands, and disable that monstrosity for them, but unfortunately not before it blew up half of their station. Alas, I couldn't destroy it with my tiny Hydra, so I left it sitting there, hoping the Teladi might bring one of their destroyers around to blow it up. I then decided to go check up on Terrans, as I've been getting closer to 20 reputation with them. I helped them escort a military freighter, then obliterated a couple of Xenon fighters attacking their station. That seemed to make them happy, as I got that one last rep point I needed, and I went to accept my new title, the Hero of Humanity. That gave me access to the moon and Earth itself, and what a beautiful sight it was. But this was not the time for sightseeing, so I went to continue the Terran campaign. I helped them blow up about 1 million Xenon ships that invaded Getsufune after I jumped into a Xenon sector. But the lady in charge seemed to be happy with me, so mission accomplished, I guess. She wanted me to contact Dalbasta, a man I briefly worked with way at the start of this playthrough, but never finished the Hatikwa questline. So I knew I had to go back to do that, but first I wanted a sweet Terran ride. I figured if I'm their special operative, I might as well try out one of their ships, so I bought a katana and took it for a spin. Remember that Xenon K in Teladi space I left behind like 2 hours ago? It was still there, so I decided to test Terran weapons on it. I had some help from some Teladi and Terran fighters, but even then, those Earth-made weapons proved very powerful and I blew the giant thing to pieces. I then went to finish the Hatikwa storyline, which included a lot of flying around and talking to people. Then Dalbasta showed up at my HQ. He agreed to help me with Terran matters, and I was sent to do some spying on the Antigone and Argon by my new Secret Service contact. While flying around, I also hit the 250 million credits mark, less than 14 hours after I spent that amount and a lot more to build my wharf. So safe to say, it was working well. As a reward, I ordered a Boron Ray Destroyer to be built, which cost me a bit over 20 million. To further increase the productivity of my factories, I then expanded advanced electronics and weapon component stations with new production and habitation modules, as those two were still the most sought after resources at my wharf. Terrans then wanted me to bribe an Antigone official, which according to Dalbasta was a trap. But that didn't stop my Earth-loving friends, as they asked me to hack an Argon defense station next, and since I was already a pro at EMPing factories for their blueprints, that went without any problems. But the problems began when I was supposed to track the repair ship that arrived. The damn thing never moved, so I was stuck there for a while. In the end, I decided to ram it to get it to move, which apparently failed my mission, but the Terrans still had an ace up their sleeve and got the info they were after. I was then informed the preparation for the next step will take a while and was given 2 missions to undermine Argon's position. One to deliver a fully stocked up ship, which I instantly ordered, and the other to build a trade station in Argon space to ruin their prices. While waiting for all that to be built, I decided to scout for resources in the Paranid territory. I wanted to build a second wharf, and a place near the constant infighting between the two Paranid factions seemed perfect. I made sure all the needed materials to construct the ship were nearby, because down there I didn't have my own factories ready to meet the demand. As everywhere, advanced electronics and weapon components seemed to be scarce, but I still went ahead and bought a plot near the Grand Highway. I then went to deliver that ship the Terrans asked for, which I had to give to the skill plate pack, the pirates that had been a thorn in my behind this whole time, so thanks for that, Terrans. The station in Argon space also completed, but I needed to wait for some hull parts to be produced. By then, my new wharf finished as well, and I bought a bunch of trade ships to supply the place. They instantly started bringing in the goods, and the first ships were ordered. While the God Realm and the Holy Order battled outside the place, it wasn't them actually ordering ships. No, it was the split, which to be honest was a big surprise. And you know what else was a big surprise? The fact that I was already 69 hours in, and if you made it this far, why don't you click that subscribe button below? Then the first hull parts were produced on the Argon station and sold for incredibly cheap prices, which was apparently enough to destabilize their economy. So that Terran mission also finished. It was then time to hack another station, this time around with a little help of my favorite pirates. The intel I escaped with was apparently juicy enough to completely destroy the trade relations between Argon and Antigone, but Dalbasta gave me an option to instead side with them versus my current employers, the Terrans. That would lead to an all-out war with Boron joining on the side of the Argon, and I didn't want that, so I decided to deliver the goods to the Secret Service lady, who ordered me to kill an Antigone official who got the whiff of the operation. And that guy was flying a behemoth with an escort of 2 M and 4 S ships. It took me a while and a lot of drive-bys to distract and kill them one by one, and I almost died on multiple occasions. That left the behemoth alone and I flew in to blow up its engines. At this point, the cavalry arrived, mainly my new raid destroyer I ordered some time ago. Its laser beam was extremely slow and took a while to recharge, but it also had a much bigger range than the behemoth, so I slowly beamed it to death. That whole fight also completely ruined my relations with the Antigone Republic, so now I had a lot of work to do to get them back to positive relations. The Secret Service lady paid me 12 million for the job well done. Then I was off to help her uncover the Yaqui pirates and their connection to the Xenon. I helped some Sagaris pioneers blow up a couple of machines, but something seemed off about their Captain Atreides, almost like I've heard the name before. Anyway, after my thorough investigation of a bar, it turned out they were in cahoots with the Yaqui this whole time. That led me to an abandoned asteroid base where I had to dispose of a customs officer who thought she can fool me. Exploration of the narrow winding corridors of the hollow asteroid led me past minefields and laser traps to a Yaqui ship, which I appropriated. When I delivered to the Secret Service lady, she was impressed and rewarded me with a new katana, which was unfortunately a bit worse than my old one. Then I focused on economy again, and since the South Wharf still had an advanced electronics issue, I decided to build a factory next doors. I had to hack some parented stations to be able to accommodate the local populace, but in the end the whole thing looked very imposing and ready to lose me around 4 million per hour. Then I continued with the Terran story and flew my new katana into Xenon space to find a Yaqui stronghold. It had some kind of a cloaking device to fool the Xenon into perceiving me as friendly until it didn't, so I had to deal with a bunch of them until the Yaqui came to escort me to their home base. Their leader gave me the spiel of how they're poor people stranded here with the Xenon and they do their pirating because they have to, yada yada yada. But I wasn't fooled. When given the option, I chose the Earth and flew back to Mission Command to blow the whistle. Secret Service lady was impressed and ordered an assault fleet to assemble, then rewarded me with a dope Terran destroyer for my efforts. She also gave me the location of the fleet leader, a giant Asgard ship, and I followed them on their slow path to battle. While flying, I decided to bolster the defenses of my home. I bought 3 L-sized guppy carriers from the Boron. Each cost me over 20 million credits, so they weren't the cheapest. Then at my own wharf, I built 8 Barracuda fighters to support each of them on their patrols, so 24 in total. I assigned 2 guppies to patrol the nearby Boron sector where my mining ships kept on getting attacked by Kha'ak marauders, and 1 to protect my home system. At this point, the Terran fleet made it to Argon Prime, and I'm not sure what went wrong, but suddenly everybody was shooting. The Asgard really showed its frightening power, obliterating even the biggest Argon ships with its giant beam weapon. The battlefield was choked with debris and dying Argon ships while the Terrans slowly pushed on. I didn't want to take part in the fighting, so I went to set up a weapon components factory next to my South Wharf, as there were a severe lack of them. Terrans were still stuck in Argon Prime at this point, so I flew to Hatikwa's Choice, which is where they were headed, as there were 2 Xenon Ks and 1 Eye attacking the Argon there while the humans were too busy shooting each other. I used my new Terran destroyer and I helped the stations blow up all 3 machine monstrosities, and I had to admit the Terrans really knew how to build a powerful weapon. I then added some trade ships to the new weapons factory and also a habitation module to the South Wharf. I also wanted to boost my fleet for the eventual showdown with the Xenon, so I ordered my first XL ship, a Boron carrier Shark. It cost me over 50 million, but with its ability to house 64 small and 8 medium ships, I knew it would be the center of my future operations. I then bought and and built 8 Hydra corvettes, 40 Barracuda heavy fighters, 20 Mako torpedo bombers, and 4 Mako interceptors to attack and defend my new mothership. At this point, the Terran Asgard decided to start nuking the Argon Wharf, so it seemed like our showdown with the Xenon was to be postponed. But unfortunately, there was nothing I could do about it. So I figured I'd buy some Terran ship blueprints, which cost me over 80 million, and caused my wharves to completely stop ship production because they were lacking Terran resources. Totally makes sense, but I was not to be intimidated by that slight bump on the road. In fact, I set up 3 new factories in my capital sector, one for metallic microlattice, one for silicon carbide, and one for computronic substrate. Then, with the help of my Discord channel, which you should totally join by the way, link is down below, I fixed the issue of my wharves not building any ships. I basically forbade Terrans and Sagaris pioneers from buying at my wharves, and while it took a while to work, my stations eventually began producing again. I also started building 2 new factories next to South Wharf to supply it with Terran goods eventually, and sent a fleet of trade ships to Earth to bring back some of the materials needed to build those stations. I was still waiting on that Asgard to make it to Xenon occupied territory, and I watched it blow up the Argon Wharf, so that was great. But then Terrans finally started moving, and I called in my big shark carrier and the destroyer that Secret Service lady gifted me with to push deep into the machine hellscape. At first, there was only a scattering of small Xenon fighters assaulting us, but as we flew farther in, a massive swarm of red descended upon us. The fighting was fierce. I helped as a fighter support for the big Asgard until Shark arrived. Then, I jumped into my destroyer. The Xenon were sending Ks to face us, and I shot down 3 of them with the help of the assault forces from a big carrier. Terrans also blew up 1 and many machine fighters. There was also a slight friendly fire mishap, and humans weren't too impressed by our actions. I didn't actually see what happened, but I guess one of the Makos must have torpedoed the escort Tokyo that was with Asgard, and diplomacy went to hell. So I flew out of the system and waited for a bit so the hostilities cooled down, but that meant I wasn't there to support the Terrans, and Tokyo somehow blew up. I came back in force though and helped the Asgard destroy another K and a Xenon station. There was a constant influx of Ms and Ps assaulting us now, but the Spear of Odin, our valorous leader, refused to move on. There was a weird asteroid Xenon base floating nearby, and the Terrans really wanted it dead. My shots barely scratched it, but the Asgard slowly took care of it while my Shark provided the fighter support. There were even a couple of Ks that showed up, but they got obliterated fast. Then I went to scout the next sector and spotted about 1 million Xenon fighters and some bigger baddies as well. But that didn't stop the Terrans. They pushed deep into the next system, and I followed in my destroyer. Shark was lagging behind, and that was what saved it. You see, the Spear of Odin decided to spear 4 Ks and an eye at the same time, and got obliterated before my katana could even undock to escape. I turned my destroyer around, but not in time to make it. I managed to teleport to the Shark seconds before explosion and took it back into safe space, leaving only death and debris behind to signal our failure. But Terrans were not to be stopped. There was already a new Spear of Odin on its way, although this time around I was a bit reluctant if I should join it. But that didn't mean I didn't want to fight the Xenon. I just wanted to fight them on my terms. So that meant I ordered 2 more Sharks. If the Ks were distracted by 100 angry bees, they couldn't shoot me, right? But of course, I needed to build those angry bees first, and I figured the best way to do that was to use the Terran materials that were now piling up at my wharfs. I decided to use katanas for M slots, Gladius heavy fighters for assault and defense, and kukris for bombardment. I also went to scout the sectors occupied by the machines, placing down multiple advanced satellites to improve my vision coverage. But I knew carriers and fighters would not be enough. I needed destroyers for the sheer firepower required to destroy the biggest of Xenon ships, and that's where the Boron were kinda lacking. So I decided to turn to my allies again, the Terrans. Their destroyers would fit nicely, but there was a slight problem. Their only shipyard was always lacking resources to build ships, so I decided to set up a microlattice factory in Terran space to help with the production. In the meantime, their second Spear of Odin got the destroyed, and they sent a Tokyo with lots of fighter support next, but no big guns. And while the Terran 3rd Assault Group slowly died in Tharka's Cascade, I ordered a couple of Osaka destroyers from them. I knew it's gonna take a while for them to get the resources and build the ships, but I had time to wait. I also kept on building new fighters to load up my new sharks, and I even got a couple of new guppy carriers. All of that was of course possible because of my two big trade centers, one around the South Wharf and one in Heretic's End, my home. And my home was the one I decided to fortify, rather than lose my ships blindly following the charging Terrans. And we all know offense is the best defense, so I flew to Emperor's Pride, the Xenon system closest to me and my parented and split friends. It was divided in two sectors by an accelerator, and that's where I laid my trap. I dropped around 50 laser towers with the goal to deny all of the big machines there fighter support. And it definitely made them ornery as 3Ks showed up to scare me off, so I had to bail. But the groundwork was done, and I knew what my next Xenon target was. Alas, before I went into war, I wanted to test my destroyers. You see, quite some time ago I discovered a giant Kha'ak installation at the edge of my home system. As is tradition, I ignored the problem, but now it seemed like a perfect test target. I jumped into my raid destroyer and slowly lasered down one of the defense stations, but it felt way too slow, and luckily I had a couple of Osakas that finished and I switched to that. Blowing up the second station was definitely much faster, but it also made the Kha'ak slightly upset. But they couldn't hurt us, as we unleashed our fury against the giant triangle mass. I also called in the rest of my old destroyers, and they slowly worked on the installation as I blew up two more defense stations. The barrage continued for a whole hour. Clearly this was a huge installation, and with its triangular structure, I think it was sometimes pretty hard for my destroyers to hit it. I ordered even more Osakas from the Terrans, because my microlattice factory was now keeping up with the shipyard's demand, and making a nice profit from it. Alas, one of my Osakas got destroyed on the way to Heretic's End, because it decided to fly right next to a K that was chilling in Argon Prime. Of course, I wanted revenge, so I teleported to another Osaka that was on the way, and I blew up the giant machine that was busy wrecking one of the Argon stations. My fleet has by now managed to get the Kha'ak installation all the way down to single digits, and I helped by delivering a killing blow. Finally, it was done. I then gathered all my forces together, 3 XL shark carriers, each with 8 medium and 64 small fighters, 5 L guppy carriers, each with 8 small ships, 10 Osaka destroyers, and last, and probably the least, the Old Guard, the 4 destroyers I got from pirating, led by the Boron Ray. Our target? The Emperor's Pride system I scouted earlier. I sent my fleet towards the jump gate leading into the place, which was heavily patrolled by the Paranid. They even had a Zeus parked there, and I was hoping he'd join in on the fun. But it took a whole hour for all my ships to actually make it there, especially the sharks were very slow to catch up. And that Zeus never went through the gate, but I did. First with my katana, as there was a conveniently placed Xenon K right on the other side of the gate. I disabled its engines, then jumped through with my Osaka to destroy it. Then I sent everyone else through, and so began the battle for Emperor's Pride 4. I decided to play it smart and immediately began constructing a defense station right next to the gate, a place we could fall back to, and I was happy to see the Paranid did the same. Xenon had 2 more Ks patrolling the system, and we took them both down, with only slight damage to some of my Sakas. Then I led my fleet further in to destroy the first of the Xenon stations in my way. I wanted to focus on it with my destroyers, as they could outrange its turrets with carriers covering our backs, but there was a slight lapse in communication and we lost a couple of small fighters. Another K charged us in defense of its home, and I found myself eye to eye with it, but luckily I was able to target and destroy its bigger turrets before it could damage my ship. One of the Sakas got a bit too enthusiastic and flew too close to the station, but I saved it in the last moment by destroying the station's turrets facing it, and the pilot managed to escape with barely any hull left. 2 stations remained, and I charged them with most of my destroyers. Carriers were assigned to guard the area around the accelerator that led further into the Xenon space, in case they sent reinforcements. It took a long time, and one of my destroyers got obliterated because its pilot had a brain fart, but we did it. We destroyed both of the defense stations and made Emperor's Pride 4 a Xenon-free space. Both of the defense stations at the gate completed as well, and Paranid claimed the sector. The battle was won. But the war was just beginning. I moved to the Emperor's Pride 6, where the Xenon had a wharf and a shipyard, and the Paranid followed me. While I was busy killing the 2 Ks that were protecting the sector, the Paranid Zeus was busy suiciding itself against the Xenon wharf. But they did begin building a defense station, and I sent my traders to deliver resources to it. Then I assaulted the shipyard. It had about a gazillion defense drones that filled the sky with their tiny corpses while we blasted at the station. But the battle wasn't without its casualties, as one of my Sakas flew too close to the turrets and got deleted in seconds. In fact, shepherding my destroyers was a big issue, as the AI had a hard time figuring out how to stay out of range sometimes. But we did it. We blew up the shipyard. First major target down, but we still had the wharf to destroy. This time around, we had a little bit of help from a Paranid destroyer, and the station went boom. No more ship production for Xenon in this part of the universe. Now their stations were mine for the taking, and I began with their solar power plant. It was a beautiful sight as my destroyers encircled it and slowly burned it into nothing. Then only 2 defense stations remained. I knew once we destroy those, the Paranid will be able to claim the sector. So I rushed to the first of the 2, and it went smooth like butter, though Xenon stood no chance. Then I led my fleet to the final station. This was what we were fighting for. This was our goal all along, and even though I had my doubts and fears at the start, I now knew we'd be victorious and the Xenon expelled from the system. During the siege, I also started building 2 factories to help the fledgling Paranid economy on this side of the gate network. I set up both silicon and ore refinery to produce basic materials and spearhead the future. And then, the last defense station has fallen. The Paranid have claimed the sector for themselves, but actually, it was not over. The Paranid managed to find another solar power plant I missed, and I had to recall my Sakas to finish the invasion. Sneaky Xenon almost thought they could get away with it, but not on my watch. And after that last station has fallen, it was finally time to celebrate. I was back in my beloved Hydra Regal, and even though I have accomplished so much, came from nothing to an economic empire dominating the ship trade, with over 1 billion credits in my bank, there was still so much to do. Terrans still needed help with their Yaki situation, and there were 2 other big storylines I never touched, for the Split and the Paranid. I also wanted to buy the XL production modules and build my own giant Asgards, but 100 hours have passed. 4 days and 4 hours playtime in total, and my job here was done for now.